Hello, I'm Semim Siyasem Yılmaz. I'm a second year MBG student and today I'm going to present you my Physics 102 project. It's named Equivalent Capacitance and its aim is to find how equivalent capacitance responds to capacitors being connected in series, in parallel, and both. So let's check it out. My equipment consists of a multimeter, 3 capacitors which are 100 microfarads each, a scientific calculator to measure the theoretical equivalent capacitances, and 4 crocodile cables. In part A, I connect one capacitor to my multimeter and record the equivalent capacitors. Then I connect one capacitor in series to that and record the equivalent capacitance one more time. And lastly, I connect one more capacitor, which makes 3 capacitors, and record the equivalent capacitors. So in this table, you can see the equivalent capacitances. In part B, I take one capacitor and connect it to my multimeter and record the equivalent capacitors. And then I take another capacitor and connect it in parallel and record the equivalent capacitance. Lastly, I take one more capacitor and connect it in parallel, which makes 3 capacitors in parallel, and record the equivalent capacitance. Here you can see my findings. In part C, I connect 2 capacitors in parallel and 1 capacitor in series to them and record the equivalent capacitance. And here you can see my findings and my system. Then I calculated my theoretical values for equivalent capacitors for part A, part B, and part C, where the systems consist of 3 capacitors, and I used these equations. My capacitors are short-circuited between each step for them to discharge fully, and I have calculated my error percentage, which is 17.4 for part A, 19.7 for part B, and 21.0 for part C. The error could be because of the missed short-circuiting, and the time of the short-circuiting may not have been enough for the capacitors to discharge fully, which will affect the equivalent capacitance. Also, the error could be because of the multimeter or the crocodile cables, their incorrect use or incorrect attachment. This experiment was successful, and it shows that equivalent capacitors and number of capacitors in series are reversely proportional, and equivalent capacitors and number of capacitors in parallel are directly proportional. And the equations here could be used to measure them.